Hello YouTube, welcome back. This is more for the international subscribers. Australia is a multicultural country, and it's really a richness that you need to experience, particularly when there's a relative lack of discrimination and people embrace each other's cultures. I flip between Sydney and here in the Northern Rivers, and it's amazing the difference in the sort of multicultural mix between places. In Sydney on the lower North Shore, I can walk down the main street of Chatswood, and I'm probably the only one in thousands who isn't of Asian ethnicity. Here in the Northern Rivers, it's largely been Anglo-Saxon ever since the original loggers settled here. And just walking through the crowd of people here at this community event, you can see really it's almost like an area that time forgot, in the sense of you don't see too much evidence of migrants or anything else. But there is one exception up here in the Northern Rivers, and that's the Italian community. And it's at Lissamore, where I've been here before and shown you on my channel. It's Lissamore where that sort of comes out. And there's a lot of pride in the Italian culture. There's a really old Fiat here, and several Lamborghinis, many of which were here last year as well, so I won't dwell on them too much. Despite popular rumours, not all barristers drive them, although I wouldn't say no to a Ferrari tractor if I came across one. The story behind how one little group, the Italians, came into the Northern Rivers is actually a fairly tragic one. It's the story of the world's first people smuggler, the Marquis de Rays in France, who wanted to create a new France in an archipelago off Papua New Guinea. He had this dream of building a new France in an island, what's ironically now called New Ireland, and it's nothing like either Ireland or France. However, he conned a lot of people from Veneto in northern Italy to spend their life savings on a boat to a new area, which he said was just like the French Riviera, and dumped them all in New Ireland, where about 100 out of 1,000 people starved. It was an absolutely disastrous thing. They called out for help. The Australian government responded and planted them near Woodburn in the Northern Rivers, which isn't too far from Lismore, in a settlement on fairly poor quality land. And it's marked today by New Italy, which you can visit if you drive up the M1 near Woodburn. But the Italian community managed to thrive under difficult circumstances. They made the poor land produce. They became expert at things like silk and silk cloth, and a lot of them joined the farming community. The original settlement didn't survive. It was on, again, very infertile land, but as the Italians made money, they moved into Lismore in a big way. And Lissamore is kind of impressive because there's a friendship festival between the Australian and Italian cultures. It's given a lot of attention now, even by the Italian government. The consul generals here and a committee called Comites, which operates under there and serves the Italian diaspora. So if you actually have maintained Italian citizenship, which would be difficult these many generations on, because the first settlement was in the 1880s. If you've maintained citizenship, you can renew your passport and do all sorts of good things here by appointment with the consular staff. And look, full marks. I mean, I haven't heard of a foreign government that's been that devoted to maintaining its culture and its little cultural place in a society that's otherwise really pretty much an Anglo-Saxon farming culture. And I'll show you little snippets of the festival and what's going on in just a moment.
Di quello che sa già della vita mia, soffiando via I pensieri come nuvole in questa notte immobile di solitudine. Non c'è amore dentro me,
Oh, goodness gracious. Battle of the Giants here today.
Let's go, John.
Oh, we've lost a casualty.
Pull! 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 Pull!
Lasciatemi cantare, perché sono vero, sono italiano. Un italiano vero.
But away from the festivities now and down to business. I'm just wandering around outside Ballina Airport at the moment. A bit early for a flight I'm going to take back to Sydney. And the topic of this video is, what kind of vehicle do you need for a macadamia farmer in the Northern Rivers? And I'm going to try and address this for both the people who live there and use it as use farming as their daily occupation, and those like me who commute a bit and do some farming but don't have the same vehicle in the Northern Rivers as they do in Sydney or wherever else they're coming from. So those of you who have taken attention to the details of my videos know that I own a Mitsubishi Triton Ute. It looks a little bit like the one in the picture now, although that's not mine, and I'm quite happy with it. It's the first Ute I've ever owned. I never thought in my whole life I would drive a Ute. They seem to be for tradies and other people, but when I started out in 2019, I thought, well, I'm a farmer, I need a Ute. And I can revisit that now, almost 5 years in, and say, well, did I really need to get a Ute in order to be a macadamia farmer? And I did think for a little while before making this video, because I don't want to give people the wrong advice. And I do obviously spend a lot of time in the company of other farmers, most of whom do have Utes of one form or another. And when I say Utes in general, you know, the standard one is a Toyota Hilux. That's a very popular one in the area. There's a number of Ford Rangers, very few Mazdas, Isuzus and others. And look, there's some Mitsubishi Tritons. They're all good, but you know, as a Ute generally, what you need is the ability for it to be serviced locally to wherever you are. Ballina and Lismore are both absolutely chock-a-block full of car service providers, and you can be very well looked after in either of those centres. There's a couple of little minor garages in Clunes and that sort of thing. I haven't tried them, but in general, if you've got one of the standard brands of Ute, you're going to be fairly well looked after. Now, you know, the less popular brands of Ute, or the ones that sell very few, you may run into some difficulties with parts and service. I'm thinking the Sanyongs's, the BYD's, others. You know, Kia's going to come out with a Ute, and I'm sure that'll be okay supported because there are Kia dealerships in the local area. But do you need an actual Ute in order to be a farmer? Certainly good for tax deduction purposes. No one in the tax office is going to doubt that if you own a farm and you buy a Ute for it, then the Ute is a primary industry vehicle. And when it comes to registering it, if it's doing most of its work on a farm, you can get primary vehicle discounts, so discounted rego for the vehicle, and that's nice. These are just little savings that you can make. But look, what about what the vehicle can handle? Anyone who's visited the Northern Rivers, and you know, my part of it in particular up around Rosebank, that sort of area, knows that the roads can be actually fairly terrible at times. And I think in terms of a Ute, that they are very strongly constructed compared to normal passenger vehicles. I'm not an expert on Utes or anything, but most Utes are built on what's called a body-on-frame or on a ladder frame chassis. Same kind of thing, where there's a very strong understructure that the whole vehicle's built on, so that it can take punishment in potholes, craggy roads, dirt roads, and while the handling isn't as pleasant as a sports car or isn't as pleasant as a standard luxury car in the city, it's got some durability about it so that, you know, there's a rigid frame that won't be damaged as easily when you go over a pothole. You've also got, as in the case of this particular ute, the ability to put on all-terrain tyres. And all-terrain tyres they're not all the way through to mud terrain, which is the roughest kind of tyre you can generally buy. But all-terrain tyres have that ability to work both on standard asphalt, but also on gravel roads, and most importantly in the Northern Rivers, poor asphalt roads. You know, there's a lot of sealed roads around the Northern Rivers, but the quality of the sealing, the quality of the asphalt, and you know, is poor. And you'll often find, and you know, with rural vehicles, that car punctures in tyres are much more common than what you'll find on city roads, simply because there's so many more sharp bits and bobs that can get in the way of tyres. And so utes all have the ability to take all-terrain tyres if you buy the right option. Some of them come with all-terrain tyres when you buy them. Most of them you fit them aftermarket. So my ute, my Triton, came with highway terrain tyres, which is another sort of step towards standard domestic tyres in the city. They wore out very quickly, and I replaced them with all-terrain tyres, and they've got much better wearing on them and also much better handling on dirt. I find them a bit more secure, particularly on corners with loose gravel roads, and that's something you will always be grateful for, particularly when you come around a blind corner and find someone charging down the road straight at you. And that happens more often than I'd care to mention. So look, there's the Utes credentials. It's a strong vehicle. It's got the ability to have the right tyres, and the majority of them are four-wheel drive these days, which is also a good thing. But do you need a ute? And other than for tax deduction purposes, I'm not entirely convinced you do need a ute. I mean, when you're bringing new trees back, if you're planting new trees, chances are they're either going to be delivered to you in someone else's truck, or you're going to have them in the back of your own ute. And while I've packed trees in the back of my ute standing up, they cop a lot of wind on the way home, and they're not happy boys really if you're going to drive at anything like freeway speeds. So what you tend to have to do is lay them down in the back of a ute tray, which means you can't hold terribly many of them. And so you'd think that something like a closed van or a truck with a fixed body or a canopy even on a ute might be a better way to go. But then, you know, most of the time you're not planting trees, you're just driving around, doing things, getting bits and bobs from Bunnings, perhaps buying the sack of fertiliser and that sort of stuff that you can chuck in the back of a ute. But a lot of these things are in fairly clean packaging. You could chuck them in the back of an SUV or something else like that. So I've watched for a while and looked at the cars that people drive around the Northern Rivers, people on the rural properties near mine. Some of them are farmers, some of them just live locally as residents. One brand I do see a lot of, more than I do in the city, is Subaru. And they've got a combination of features, I think, and they're particularly popular in the Northern Rivers. They've got that all-wheel drive, which is really good in gravel road and on loose corners again. Just that ability to have all four wheels driving the vehicle adds that extra layer of safety. And I think, look, just reputation-wise, most of them can also take some all-terrain tyres. Not many brands make all-terrain tyres for things like the Subaru Outback, but you can get some Yokohama Geolanders, which are really good hard-wearing tyres. And so, yeah, I think there's about 6 residents or 7 residents on my road at Rosebank. I think all but one of them has a Subaru, a little bit like this. And they're very well serviced and supported in the Northern Rivers. Every mechanic knows them. They've got a critical mass there that you just don't see that much of in the city. SUVs are very common. I mean, you're not going to see too many sports cars like the one in front of you going along the roads at Rosebank. Reason being is they're very low to the ground, and if they get into a pothole at all, you can scrape the bottom of the vehicle and cause some real problems with ground clearance. And so the SUVs, which tend to have a little bit more ground clearance, obviously give you that flexibility if you have to go over bumps, causeways, if you have to drive through shallow water when it's wet, that sort of thing. So you want something with a little bit of ground clearance. So the other question is, I mean, look, can you drive a Toyota Corolla around the Northern Rivers? Just a standard, little hatchback, average height off the ground, reasonable size engine, but nothing to write home about. Do you see them? Can they run around the rural roads of the Northern Rivers? And the answer is yes, they can. And the little Toyotas are fine. It's just when you get to the edge of the sort of the really wet weather that you might be grateful for something with four-wheel traction, or at least all-wheel drive. And you might be you're grateful for a little bit more ground clearance when it comes to, potentially passing someone on a country road, having to go off into the verge in order to give someone space. You might be really grateful for a little bit more ground clearance there and a little bit more traction so that you don't get bogged. Now, I'm conscious it's a subject that people are going to have their strong views about, because people do have strong views about cars. Look, I don't know. Again, like I said, I've got a Ute. Most macadamia farmers I know have got a Ute. So I suppose if you're going to join the club of macadamia farmers, owning a Ute is some subtle, unspeakable part of being in the boys' club that owns macadamia farms. But if you don't subscribe to that, I actually think you can get away without one, and particularly if you like a reasonable SUV that can do some double duty with family and that sort of stuff. And you'll always find that a little bit more convenient when it comes to just a standard shopping trip and taking the groceries home in something that isn't the tray of a Ute or the back seat of a Ute, which is where I tend to put my groceries when I'm doing my thing. So for those of you who are about to start the journey on macadamia farming, and there's one in particular I'd like to send congratulations to. I'll identify him when it's the appropriate time. But he's just bought a macadamia farm in Rosebank, and I'm so proud of him. He's got a great future ahead of him, I reckon. But yeah, interested in your comments as well, guys. If you have your own view, I'm sure there's some macadamia farmers there who are lurking and would like to chip in their own view about what they drive, what they've experimented with, and perhaps any stories you can contribute about smaller cars and how well or how long they fared on the roads of the Northern Rivers, long term, just as a daily runabout. Is a Corolla enough? Are we really spending too much money on great big diesel gas guzzlers when something smaller would do just fine for the majority of purposes? Great to have your company again, as always. Hope you enjoyed the pretty pics at the start, and I'll be back again soon. Bye for now.